Let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tanya, founder of Finlit for Teens, and thank you all for being here this evening. So before we get started, just some housekeeping rules. The session is being recorded, so please make sure to stay on mute. And if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. We'll make sure to answer your questions through there. And if we don't get to your question, though, I will make sure to answer it through my channel. So today I'm really excited because we have an awesome guest speaker coming here today. But before we get into that, I'm just going to give you a little background on Finlit for Teens. So my main goal with Finlit for Teens is to provide information on the basics of financial literacy with content that's simple, bite-sized, and easy to consume. And so for today's session, our guest speaker and I wanted to shed light on a topic that doesn't pop up as top of mind when you think of financial literacy, but it's something that's super important and powerful in influencing the way that we think and make our financial decisions. And this topic is growth mindset. So many of y'all may be familiar with Dr. Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset, but if not, I highly recommend that you go and check it out. But our guest speaker here today, I was really inspired by her story of wanting to enable an early start of financial education for our teen audience. That was something that really resonated with me, especially with Finlit for Teens. And so I'm really happy to have her here today to share more of her story and also talk about growth mindset and why it's important. How do we start implementing it in our lives, and how does it relate to personal finance? And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to founder of SavemyCents, Shangs Background.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shangs Background. I'm 35 years old. I'm a personal finance blogger. I'm also a management consultant. That's my actual job. And I'm a mom, and I consider myself someone who is work optional. You may have read about this concept in the media called FIRE, which is called Financial Independence. Retire early. My husband and I reached the ability to FIRE when I was 31 years old. And to get there, growth mindset was a huge part of it. So a little bit of background about me is that I went to really good schools. I went to Harvard undergrad, and I went to University of Chicago for my MBA. My parents helped pay for college, and I got scholarships to go to business school. So I graduated both of these schools debt-free, which I think is a really big component. On top of that, I started saving money with my very first paycheck. In my early 20s, I had savings rates of about 20 to 30% of my pre-tax income went to savings and investments. To really get to work optional though, when my husband and I got married, we realized if we really wanted to break free of the rat race and to no longer depend on two jobs for the rest of our lives, we need to learn to live off of the lower of our two incomes. That meant raising our savings rates up to 50% of our pre-tax income, which is quite a lot. Going from 20 to 30 to that 50% was hard. It meant pulling back on a lot of nice to have expenses. It meant making our must-have expenses, such as our rent and our transportation, as low cost as possible. And through the years that I worked towards that more frugal mindset, the growth mindset was a part of it. Because one can easily look at the years that my husband and I were being frugal and say, actually, you missed out on a lot, didn't you? You probably didn't have any fun. I got a lot of those comments from a lot of people. You must be cheapskates to live so frugally. And it's not until I learned to see things in a positive, non-depriving way that allowed me to reach the 50% savings rate with joy, with gratitude. And that's the same mindset and the same sort of idea that I'm still sharing with everybody today on Instagram. So let's get started on defining the growth mindset. All right, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I think there might be one or two people who are not muted.
Okay, I'll go ahead and just unmute them. Or mute.
Thank you. Okay. I think there's an iPhone and one more. All right, perfect. Okay, so Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck is a fantastic Stanford psychologist, and she came out with this famous book called Mindset. And what she wanted to share with the rest of us is that even though we are all born with different capabilities, you know, some of us are stronger in one area, and some of us know how to do math real well, and some of us are really great at the arts, and some of us are just really fast learners, and some of us need a little bit more time. Even though we all have different capabilities, she believed that our intellect, our abilities are not fixed. What does fixed mindset actually mean? Because I need to make sure that we understand what we're comparing here. Fixed mindset means that we believe that what we are born with, we're stuck with for the rest of our lives. That this is all you got and you can't do anything better. Growth mindset is the opposite. It says, okay, we all start on different levels. Some of us more of this and more of that, but we can grow it. We can cultivate it and we can develop it further. And if you believe in this growth mindset, you may actually end up being more successful than initially thought. And that was mind-blowing when Carol came out with this. It blew everybody's minds. And she had a lot of experiments, longitudinal experiments across people of all ages to prove her point. She performed experiments in her psychology lab on people as young as, I think, toddler age, but she also did tests up to people in college, for example. So I'm going to show to you all a couple of examples of how her test showed growth mindset at play in performance. She did this mostly in an academic environment. So, okay, can we, all right, we're good. In one study, Carol used 10-year-olds as her subjects. She divided the group in half, and she gave them some problems that are considered a little too hard for a 10-year-old to solve. And they recorded how people felt about these problems as they were trying to solve them. Some people would say, oh, I love a challenge. And they identified these kids as having the growth mindset. Other kids, after trying the problems, would say, oh, they felt like they failed and they would rather cheat next time, or they would look for someone who did worse so that they can feel better. Those were the people that were considered ones having the fixed mindset. And then she would run tests like these over and over across people of many ages, many different contexts. And what she found over time is that people who embrace challenges, people who don't feel defeated by failure, by and large, they do better on performance compared to those who had the fixed mindset. So let me drill that down into something a little bit more specific. She had studies of kindergarten age students all the way up to fifth graders, and they're given a nonverbal IQ test. And these are 10 somewhat challenging problems. And most of the children will do well on the first 10 problems. And then she divided into 3 groups. 1/3 was given what she calls the intelligence praise. That says, wow, you got 8 right. That's a really good score. You must be smart at all of this. 1/3, they were given the effort praise, which was, wow, you got 8 right. That's a really good score. You must have tried really hard. And she also had a control group. They were just told, wow, 8 right. That's a really good score. But they were not praised on either their intellect or their effort. Then she gave all these students a choice to do a second set of problems. They could either do easier or they could do harder. What happened? The third group, the 1/3 that were praised for their intellect, they were told that they were smart, they actually end up choosing the easier questions. Most of the students who were praised for their effort wanted the more challenging questions, right? So what does that tell us about growth mindset right there? If you tell someone that their abilities are fixed, you actually handicap them going forward. So she proved her growth mindset with this experiment. And so they continued this experiment, and then the students were then actually given a series of more difficult problems. None of them were given easier problems. They all got harder problems. Then they looked at the 3 groups again. The results were magnified. That first third that were told that they were smart now thought that they were not smart at all because they struggled on that second set of harder questions. However, the students who had been praised for their effort, who were told, wow, you worked really hard at all of this, they were very engaged with the harder questions. They loved it. They embraced it. They wanted to embrace this challenge and go for it. They tried different strategies. They were motivated. They probably tried different ways of solving these problems. And at the end, when all the students were asked to rate how did they enjoy this experiment, the effort group, the group that was praised, the group for their efforts, the group that was put into the growth mindset, said that they really liked it, that the harder problems were actually their favorites. The group that was praised for their intellect, the ones that were put into the fixed mindset, they said that they didn't enjoy it as much. In fact, their enjoyment dropped off the moment they got hit with the harder problems. And so that was Carol's work, and that was what she published in the book, and that she showed how it would apply in education, in sports, and in business. So I highly recommend that book to read, because basically what I just told you will be in there. But I'm going to share a couple of, before I go to Tanya and myself's personal stories, I'm going to pause for a minute or two and share stories from the people that I coach. So I'm a personal finance blogger, and people also write me privately to help coach them out of debt, to coach them towards saving for retirement, to make sure that they're saving and investing enough to care for their families and their loved ones and their children. I've often found that when people first come to me, they are scared, and many of them are stuck in the fixed mindset. They'll say things like this: I'm not good with money because my parents never taught me how. I feel that I have failed many times before with money, so I don't think I can be successful. All I see around me are examples of people being bad at money, so I don't think I can get good at this. Or a very popular one, especially with women, because my audience is majority female. I just don't think I'm good at finance because I'm not good at math. What I realized was these people that I've been coaching to get debt free, to build wealth, they have been put into fixed mindsets over time, either by their experiences, by their family histories, which some of them are quite tragic. I'm not downplaying the fact that a lot of these people came from very painful backgrounds, or someone just told them through marketing that they weren't good enough to invest or they don't deserve wealth. And what I found was over time, yes, I did a math and I showed people how to save and how much they can save over time. And if you apply a certain growth, they can retire in X number of years. It was not the math that I had to help the people that I coach get over. It was the mindset. If I couldn't help people realize that actually you can welcome in more abundance, or it's okay to feel fear, but you have to do things scared, or it's okay to be the first of your generation or the first in your family to get a college degree. It's hard, but you're going to keep going. It wasn't until I taught people to rewire and reframe everything in terms of growth rather than fixed or scarcity. That was when things clicked and allowed people to move on and become financially successful. And I've done this for a couple of years now, and that's what I've been observing as well. Carol's research really plays out in real life in the people that I've helped. So we're going to move on, and Tanya and I now are going to share a little bit about our personal stories of growth mindset, and I'll go first. So even though right now I blog a lot about the success that I have had with personal finance, the fact that I am work optional and that I earn, knock on wood, earn good income, that I'm very lucky to still have a job in the middle of this very crazy pandemic, I realize I am very lucky. But I would also say that when I was younger, before I got into Harvard, before I became more of the adult that I am today, probably more around Tanya's age, I would say, I had a lot more of a fixed mindset. So back then, I don't know if these things still exist, but there were before the SATs, there were the PSATs, the ones that they administered to children a little bit earlier to see how you're doing. Okay, nodding. Okay, we still have those. And even before the PSATs in middle school, in elementary school, at least for my school district, I came from Massachusetts, there were standardized tests measuring you on a couple of different things, I think math and reading and reasoning and things like that. And back then I scored pretty high on those tests. My teachers did tell my parents, hey, you know, you got a smart kid on your hands. But back then I believed that because I tested well on those tests, that I was smart. See how that fixed mindset kind of comes in? That because I got A's, that means I must be smart. It doesn't say anything about the effort. It doesn't say anything about hard work that I put in. I just thought I was born with this brain. So I got into Harvard. I loved my Harvard experience, by the way. I loved it. I really give a lot of credit to Harvard for opening up a wealth of opportunities in my life. But when I first got to Harvard, oh my goodness, my mind was blown. Everybody around me was so smart. Like, I thought high school was hard. No, Harvard was hard. I remember that I wanted to be an economics major. I was an economics major. My first economics class, they have these unit tests. They test you on like a small, that month's topics, they test you. And you go in and you take the test, and the upperclassmen grade, and you get your grade right away. And if you fail the test, you have the chance to retest. I failed that first unit test twice. And I remember in the lecture hall, they said, if you've failed the first one, raise your hand because we got to give you a different test. And then I was like, I failed it twice. So the room kind of got really quiet because the proctors were looking at each other. They're like, oh, we got to give her the alternate test because she took the first two already and she failed both. It was embarrassing. And I got average grades at Harvard. I was not a straight A student. I was more like a straight B plus student. And that put me into a fixed mindset. I was like, gosh, I must be the admission mistake or something because I'm not getting good grades at school. And I remember in my internship searches, my sophomore year and my junior year, these were really, really hard to get internships. It was hard. I would apply over 100 times before getting my very first internship offer in college. That was a humbling experience. It was not until my early to mid 20s, after I graduated from college, when I started to forgive myself. I was defining myself by all these grades, my GPA, internships I didn't get, computer science that I didn't study, or not getting summa cum laude or whatever. I realized that I was defining myself by getting on lists and accolades and the grades, even the amount of money that I was earning. And I realized it was not about this. It was about values. It all comes down to values, and I had to figure out how to get there. After college, while I was already in my first job, I started pursuing a side hustle in wedding photography. I knew nothing about running a business going in. My first thought was just, hey, I kind of like photography. Let's make some money from it, because I wanted money when I was in my 20s. I didn't know how to grow an audience on Facebook, and there was no Instagram back then, and Twitter just got started. No one had any idea what Twitter was going to turn into. I didn't even know how to charge. I think like my first client paid me $20 for a photo or something. So what did I do? I read books, I read blogs, I talked to people. I got over myself, and I made friends with people who I thought were my competitors. I tried things, I failed, I did a lot of stuff for free. I learned from my clients, I got feedback, and I grew. And it was from this experience where I realized, wait, you can make something out of nothing, right? Like, okay, I take photos with the camera, but I made a business. And that was my first taste of growth mindset. And that's sort of when things started taking off and making sense for me. So over to you, Tanya.
Yeah, I really love your story, Shang, and how, your view and perspective on what defines success really changes throughout your life based on all your experiences. So thanks for sharing with us. So I'll go ahead and share a quick little personal story of mine. So a big experience for me that shaped a lot of my mindset and values today was karate. Karate taught me a lot about having perseverance and grit and discipline. And basically how it worked in karate was we would have these testing cycles, and it was kind of a pass or fail system. And so if you pass, you advance to your next belt. but if you fail, it's a no change. So you just stay at the same belt. And in karate, I did experience quite a few no changes. And in the moment, I was watching everyone get their new belts, get new awards, trophies, medals. And it kind of felt like I was just there at square one after all that hard work. But looking back on it now, I'm really thankful that I experienced all those no changes, because in hindsight, it was a chance for me to learn and grow even more. I was more motivated to take extra classes, to come in for extra help. I learned new techniques and got out of my comfort zone. I tried new things that I've never tried before, and I just grew as a student. And so at the end of this 5-year-long journey I had with karate, I'm proud to say that I received my first degree black belt. And yes, I did learn a lot of cool kicks and punches along the way. But at the end of the day, I learned something more than that. I learned that it's important for me to embrace challenges and look at setbacks instead as an opportunity for me to learn, grow, and come out as a better person. So now that we've both shared our personal stories, I'll turn it back over to Shang so she can talk about applying growth mindset to personal finances.
Love it. And thanks so much for sharing that story. Black belt is hard. So
Yeah,
congrats on
thank
that.
you.
So I'm not going to be spending a lot of time today telling you, spend less than you earn and invest the difference. I mean, those are the tenets of personal finance, and Warren Buffett will say that to you. Plenty of people will teach you the actual tips and tricks on how to do personal finance, but it's really, I'm getting down to the mindsets that got the people that I tried to help stuck. And these are the ways that I help them get past the fears and the regrets that they have in their lives. The most important concept is your past does not define your future. I found this so many times. People said that they're likely doomed in personal finance because their parents were terrible with money. They saw their parents gamble, or they saw their parents take a lot of loans or live off of credit cards, or that the fact that they never learned about money. Personal finance is starting to be taught more in the public school system around the US, but I definitely remember when I was in high school, it was not a subject that anyone ever knew of. And there were also a lot less online content than there is today about personal finance. And also many people grew up in socioeconomically depressed neighborhoods and geographies where all they saw around them was poverty. And it's very easy for all these circumstances to put someone into a fixed mindset and say, I'm going to be like where I grew up. And that's really important for people to let go, is that, okay, you didn't learn from the best, but you can learn from the best at any time with the time that you have now. So I really want people to understand that your past does not have to define your future. As Carol Dweck proved in her research, our abilities are not fixed. We're born with different abilities, but we have the potential to develop any underdeveloped ability at any time, as long as we're willing to embrace the challenge, to forgive ourselves, to try, maybe fall on our faces, like Tanya, maybe read a lot and learn from others to figure out what was preventing us from passing that goal before. And so abilities are not fixed. I see plenty of people make career changes in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, 70s. People make career changes all the time. I would like for most people to be in control of these career changes, but unfortunately also with a rapidly changing economy, with what's going on with the pandemic, with automation, with big data, with the United States moving to a more knowledge-based economy, eventually there are going to be jobs that become obsolete. There are no horse and buggy carriage drivers today, right? Jobs become obsolete. So therefore, the job that you may start out with does not have to be the job that you end up with. And I think it's really important here for people to remember to focus on gaining highly compensated skills and certifications. They really matter. It doesn't mean you have to go to college, although I do think in the United States, the college degree is pretty meaningful. You don't have to go to the best college, but you gotta focus on studying a subject that matters. And I know a lot of people like to study a subject that's interesting, but I have to say, you still got to gain a skill that someone's going to pay you for, because how else are you going to pay your bills, right? You got to eat, you got to have a roof over your head. Always been negotiating your salary upward. Another symptom of fixed mindset is that people take their very first offer as given and don't negotiate. This particularly affects women, but obviously my audience is more than female. So again, everybody should negotiate their salary upward, because it's one of the most powerful tools you have, one of the most in control positions you will ever be. Because when a company wants to hire you, they really want you. Once they hire you, then there's less of an incentive to keep you unless they really, really like you. So you have a lot of power at the negotiating table right when you get your job offer. Change jobs early if you need to. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got coming out of college was, Shang, your 20s are about experimentation. Before you get married, before you have kids, experiment, take the biggest, craziest risks, look for those rocket ships, do whatever you got to do to play with your career. And I did. I went to business school and I was working on a startup. My parents were freaked out. They thought that I was not going to make any money coming out of business school, because they're like, what is this startup? We don't know anything about it. I came out of business school into another startup that paid me 6 figures. I was like, hey, look, I got a 6-figure job and it worked out. But the reason that I was able to do all that was because this is before me being married, before me having a child. Now things are harder. It is harder now to experiment with my career. One of my favorite phrases that I share with others is, do it scared, but do it anyway. And this is the progress, not perfection kind of mindset, right? You don't need to be perfect to start. I always say, take a look at babies learning to walk. It's not that babies suddenly get up one day and walk in perfect walking motion or whatever. No, they get up, they fall, they get up, they fall, they get up and fall until they figure it out. But most children, except for those with motor deficiencies, figure out how to walk eventually. So when you first start out in personal finance, your budget is not going to be perfect. So many people give up on that very first budget because they're like, wow, I thought I was going to spend this amount of money and I ended up spending that amount of money and I am giving up on my budget. And I said, no, your first budget is probably going to be wrong. It's a starting point. It's going to shift. It's going to look different as you track more of your spending, but you got to start. And you're going to make mistakes when you're trying something new. My first year when I made money as a wedding photographer, I owed thousands of dollars in taxes because nobody told me that when you run your own business, you have to set aside self-employment taxes and also pay income taxes on what you made. No one told me. Huge mistake in my life. Thankfully, I had the money to pay for it, but I was crying on the day when my accountant, my CPA gave me the tax bill. I was like, yeah. But that was my first tax filing experience. It's a very common mistake for many small business owners to make. And I learned from that. So, you're not going to necessarily get the best results from the start. See it as a learning experience. Learn and go. As long as I see all failures in my life as a learning experience, I don't feel like I actually failed. That's one attitude that I've come to adopt. Learn from others who have done it before you. Read books. It's interesting because we're doing this over Zoom, and I love the Zoom format that Tanya suggested because I feel like it's a way for both of us to go much more in depth and for you to hear from us and learn a lot. But my main social media platform actually is Instagram. Instagram is limited. There's not a lot that I can fit on a little image in a square, and even if they give me 10 of those, people are not going to swipe through all 10 to learn. It's bite-sized information, and personal finance is complex. Like after a certain point, you just can't break down a complex topic in 10 squares. Books have it. There's plenty of really great books out there. Read blogs, try to engage in different ways of thinking. I really believe in absorbing information the best way that you know how in different ways. I don't learn very well by audio. I used to fall asleep in a lot of college lectures because there was no participation. I stayed awake in all of my business school classes because you had to participate and I was much more engaged. And now I'm like, oh, no wonder I fell asleep in college. So I learned today also that I'm not going to learn as well via audio. Talk to people, ask questions. There's a lot of knowledge out there that's not written down, but comes with the wisdom of time. For me, it's really important whenever I start something new that I look for people with much more experience than I have had in whatever I'm trying to do. And also, you don't have to take every piece of advice that people give you, including mine. You don't have to take what I'm telling you either. Take what you like and ignore what you don't like. You have the choice. And because I am on social media and many of us are exposed to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, whatever, remember that social media is a highlight reel. There is no camera that follows someone along 24/7. It's edited. People, you have professional teams behind photography and videography and music and all that. Don't compare your behind the scenes with someone else's highlights. It's not fair. It's not a fair comparison. When you see someone on social media buying something, that's consumption. Consumption doesn't actually necessarily mean that they have wealth. Now, wealthy people can obviously buy more things, but there's plenty of people who live a broke lifestyle on social media and are putting it all on credit, and they just don't tell you that they got credit card debts, right? And you don't know what it took for someone to get to where they are. A lot of people are like, wow, Shang, you earn a lot of money. I mean, that's awesome. I would, must be nice. Must be nice is a terrible phrase. I'm like, well, do you also know that I work on average 12 to 16 hours a day, that I don't get a lot of sleep, that it impacts my ability to socialize with friends? Everything is a trade-off. There is no perfect scenario in life. And some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know worked very, very hard to get to where they are. And that's all it is. They put in that effort. And progress is progress. I really believe in celebrating our imperfections and our progress and not trying to be perfect or put anybody else on a pedestal. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And it's time that we normalize that conversation and make that the standard instead of perfection as the standard. So that's my sort of long rant about growth and money mindset. I'd love for Tanya to jump in and add anything else.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shang. I loved everything you said. +1 to everything you mentioned. I also loved your quote about, don't compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlights. I think that's really important as well. So now we'll open it up to some Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat. But I'll start out with some questions that were submitted to me. So the first question is, how can I think about making better spending choices, especially with all the temptations there are?
The first piece is probably to remove the temptation. Easier said than done, but think about where your eyeballs are. We are very visual buyers, and a lot of ad dollars are spent on social media, on TV ads, on your Hulu, your Netflix, or whatever. You're seeing ads whenever you pick up a phone or a computer. So one thing that I say is, before we can work on the inner work that's required, just remove the temptation by putting your phone on airplane mode or going on a social media diet. That being said, at the end of the day, you have to spend aligning it with your values. I always say in personal finance, I don't care what you spend your money on, as long as you get to your goals. And one of your goals probably should be providing for yourself in retirement. So whenever you buy something, ask yourself, is this meeting a priority that I have in my life? Is this helping me reach my personal, my financial, my career goals, or whatever? I think that once you start looking at everything that you buy, there's a famous quote. Some people say Joe Biden said this, although I'm not entirely sure Joe Biden said this. It's like, they said something to the effect of, show me your pocketbook or show me your bank statement and I'll be able to tell you what this person values, right? What you value is not what you say you value. What you value is probably where you put your time and your dollars.
Yeah, that's a great point. The next question is, how often do you have a cheat day for splurging?
I love this. This is a great question. So it's not so much the frequency, but rather that my husband and I designed our budget to allow for nice to haves. If you live quote unquote like a monk, you're probably going to be really unhappy. And the work that we did to get there was number one, be grateful for what we have. So I promote a hashtag called I get to. Take every I have to phrase that you say when you wake up in the morning, oh, and you say it as an I get to. So I have to take care of my screaming baby to I get to take care of a beautiful baby. I have to wake up early and go to work. I get to go to work. I have to study a really long time for this next exam. I get to study for an exam. Once we start appreciating what we have currently in our lives, we invite that abundance, that joy into our lives, and we start appreciating things for what they are. Then you kind of see most things as nice to have, as wonderful things to have, that you don't give yourself as much guilt for going on a budget. Going on a budget doesn't mean you're broke. People who are on a budget are usually the ones on their way to wealth because they give their money a role to play. And I do believe in being intentional about your nice to have expenses. My husband and I, we love to travel. Before pandemic, we were in New Zealand when pandemic hit. We had to buy tickets at the last minute to exit New Zealand before the prime minister down there closed the borders on us. We flew out right before the borders were closed. That's how much we love travel. I enjoy nice food. So I'll try to cook low cost meals most of the time to back out money to afford a nice to have meal some of the time. So it's all about balance. Sometimes you probably don't feel like splurging because you don't need to. I think that pandemic has shown a lot of us that there's a lot of things you don't really need. So it's not so much that I have a specific budget. It's more, okay, in any given year, in any given situation, how do I want to allocate my budget? And I'll do it that way. And then so it doesn't feel like a cheat or a splurge. It's more like I plan for it. I plan for it to meet some of my own needs, which I think is a more balanced way to look at it.
Yeah, I love the I get to as well. I think that's so powerful, and it's really can be applied to so many aspects in our life. Um, the next question we have is, what advice do you have for your teen, early high school students who are looking to pursue an Ivy League education?
Great question. I'm hoping that admissions are still similar to what I faced back then. You know, they're looking to build a student body. They're looking for certain characteristics that match what the school, you know, believes they can, you know, help educate. They're looking for well-rounded individuals, but they also have certain profiles. So I remember when I applied to Harvard, I read this book of 50 successful Harvard application essays, and they actually grouped the application essays into 5 flavors. There were the really good writers who just wrote beautifully. That was one category. There were the super nerdy academic sciencey type people who wrote about an experiment. And then there were people who wrote about a personal life challenge. And there were 2 other categories I don't remember. I fell into the personal challenge category. I wrote about a childhood disease that I grew up with. And so you do have to be a little bit strategic. It's really important to understand that your file is being read as a whole story. All the parts have to build on each other and give the admissions officer a sense of who you are as a person. So things gotta fit. Your extracurriculars gotta make sense with your interests, with what you want to study. You gotta have the grades. The grades do matter. Your test scores, your GPA, and your references can be very important. I remember I broke protocol one day because there was one teacher that I wasn't so sure on for a school reference, and all our teachers are very nice. They let us read the reference before they put it into the sealed envelopes for school. I was aghast the reference he wrote me was one sentence long or something. I was like, does this teacher not have any experience writing recommendations for college? I was like, I'm so glad I caught this. And I switched that third recommendation to a different teacher. Like I had a couple of teachers I to pick from, and I thought that this teacher was going to write me a nice one. Turns out he didn't care. And so you have to also very proactively manage all parts of your application to make sure that they all say more or less the same things. Talk to your teachers and tell them, you know, why do you want to go to this school? What do you want them to highlight about you? Teachers have to keep track of a lot of students, so giving them the tools to highlight and help your case would matter. And send stuff in on time, or ideally a couple days ahead of time. You never know if the system's going to go down on the day that you're submitting your application. So I always say try to give yourself a few days buffer so your application doesn't get caught in the timeline.
Yeah, that's great advice, Shang, all about being proactive and taking those important steps. We just have one more question today, but before that last question, there's a link to a very quick survey in the chat. So if you guys could go ahead and fill that out, I'd really appreciate that. So the last question that we have today is, are there any other books that you would recommend besides the one discussed in the call, the Carol Dweck for growth mindset?
Yes. There's another one that's very similar to Carol Dweck called Switch on Your Brain. The doctor is Caroline Leaf. She's also a psychologist. She's Christian, so the book does have Christian elements, but that's because that's just part of who she is. She's not trying to use this book to spread Christianity or anything. And they complement each other because they both kind of talk about this very modern concept of you can rewire your brain from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset. Now, both of these psychologists have built on seminal work that was done by a psychologist named Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a survivor of the Holocaust and wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. This book is a bit heavier because he does talk about the Holocaust. Basically, what he discovered was that when people find meaning in their lives, when they can attribute and find something positive, even in the most horrible of situations, growth mindset, fixed mindset, Carol Dweck, I'm gonna type that. Carol Dweck, Caroline Leaf, and Viktor Frankl are the three authors. And so Viktor Frankl, I actually think is sort of the more older forefather of growth mindset. Carol Dweck defined it. She defined it for the world, but Viktor Frankl's work kind of set that up for generations of psychologists. If you read these three books, I think you'll uncover the meaning of joy. That's kind of how I call my entire process from going from my fixed mindset to the growth mindset, my finding joy journey. And for me, I'm all about spreading joy because I differentiate between joy and happiness. Happiness depends on external circumstances, on the list and the accolades that I define myself. Joy comes from within. And I learned the power of generating joy from my heart every day. And that's powerful because it means that no matter the circumstances, even though I'm in a pandemic, I'm lonely and I'm taking care of my child and trying to juggle work on top of that, it allowed me to find joy. Josh, I'm happy to send you a link to Carol Dweck's experiments afterwards, so you can learn more about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shang. Those are awesome pieces of advice on those books. I'll be sure to add them to my reading list, before school starts back up. So I wanted to just say thank you to everyone for coming out here today. And thank you for all your insightful pieces of advice and recommendations and everything, Shang. It's really appreciated. If y'all could just do me a really huge favor and just go check out her Instagram and blog. She's got amazing content on finances, financial literacy, and all that great stuff. And I'm sure you guys will love it. So have a great rest of your night. And thank you so much for coming.